Welcome to Cycles TV. This session of the Market Cycles Report is intended exclusively to provide information and education to help individuals better understand cycles and the markets. However, this information is not to be construed as professional advice as to the buying and selling of securities. In no event does the host express any opinion with respect to, or make recommendations regarding, the purchase or sale of any particular investment instrument. There is a very high degree of risk involved in trading. Buying or selling decisions are solely within the personal discretion of each individual. And now, enjoy the show. Here is your host.
Welcome to the Foundation for the Study of Cycles. My name is Lars Fontin. We have Monday, we have Cycles TV. Today is a very special episode because first I needed to pre-record today's session because I'm on travel for the whole week, so we cannot have our live chat today. And second, I want to dedicate this episode for a very special subject, which I will reveal with you through the next 15 or 20 minutes. We need to be careful, or I would need to make this kind of trigger warning because the content I will discuss could trigger a lot of controversial discussions. So therefore, we need to be careful treating that content. But I think from the perspective of cycles research, we have a special time to bring this research and this analysis back to the discussion. At least that's what I would say. And stay with me for the next 15 minutes, and then you will get aware what I'm talking about. So let's start. Why I'm bringing this in. One reason bringing this topic in is, what you see here. We are in the solar cycle 25. This is what we're seeing here. So this is solar cycle number 25. This is the projected cycle of the solar activity. And we are close to reaching the solar maximum of that cycle. So it's predicted 2025, but if you follow recent discussions, it's looked like that the solar maximum will come earlier. So maybe 2024, next year, up to discussion. But we are close to approaching solar maximum cycle. That's an 11-year cycle. So if you're not in the solar cycle topic, this is a cycle or nominal cycle of 11 years. I mean, could be longer or shorter, but there is a clear analysis of this cycle, which analyzes the solar activity. So the solar cycle shows us when is the sun at the minimum activity in regards to their solar flares, sunspots, and different activities which are coming out of the sun, and when is the sun in its maximum state of activity. And this is a cyclic behavior we see as behavior from the sun. This cycle is known, this cycle can be projected, we can even measure and project this cycle. And I mean, just from the solar cycle, it's now interesting that we are approaching the maximum. There's a lot more in, so the solar activity is much higher than expected. So that's also interesting currently to monitor that the recent activity is even much, much higher than anticipated. But that's not the topic I want to talk about. It's connected to that cycle. So I will now jump back over 100 years, which is related to that cycle. And then I will get back into the current situation, because I was remembered of that cycle and the research I've come across years ago, because we are living in these times of geopolitical tension with more and more wars on our planet here. And while this was happening, this reminded me of a paper which I stumbled upon years ago, but I think it's worth bringing it back to the cycles community if you have not heard about that so far. And I want to talk about this guy, Alexander Chizhevsky, hard to pronounce that name. And he wrote, or he analyzed cycles around after World War I, so 1917, 1920, so almost over 100 years back in history. He was a Russian professor who studied the relationship between these different sun activity and what he called human health or human behavior. I mean, let's just keep in mind, over 100 years, so after the First World War, he analyzed also if there are relation between the behavior of the population, so related to wars and solar activity. So as I said, this could trigger now a lot of controversial discussion, but let's see what we have on the table here. So he started that research, and it's anyhow fascinating if someone over 100 years ago has come up with these cycle analysis topics. And it was his paper at around the year of 1920, 1927. It has become public. So this paper is not available in English. So it was a Russian paper. So we don't have, or at least I don't have the original paper at hand. But there's now some follow-up discussion on that paper. And let me bring that in here. So be with me with some follow-up. So this is, and let me guide you through. So he did a research of the historical events with relation to the periodic activity of the sun. And he presented these results in a study, what he called investigation of the relationship between the sunspot activity and the course of the universal history process, from past to today. So it's a very bold title, and to be honest, no one really took this research really honest. And maybe it's also because of the outcome. And this is more or less what he uncovered, or what he wrote about in his studies. So he discovered that the solar minimum is the period when people or the population tolerates repression by the power, as if they lack the energy to take the needed changes. And he found that during the sunspot maximum, the movement of humans is also at its peak. So he correlated activities in human excitability. So he tried to build the index of mass human excitability, which covered the span of 500 before Christmas to that point of day, so 1920. And he analyzed over 70 countries, over almost every signs of human unrest, wars, revolution, riots, expedition, and whatever, and the amount of humans involved. And he found, at least from his findings, that most significant events in these human unrest occurred during maximum sunspot activity, which always occurred at solar maximum cycle peaks, 11 years solar cycle, and the maximum solar sunspot activity is observed during the solar maximum period of the cycle. So, I mean, at that point in time, with the data and the information processing he had at hand 100 years ago. So this is anyhow already fascinating that someone did this by the tools he had at hand at this point in time. Interesting then is that I think it was Stalin then, after this has been published, so he was asked to take down all his geomagnetic and solar cycle research he has done. So he was asked, please don't write anymore about geomagnetic sunspot activities. Take down all your analysis. He didn't, and he had gone into prison for over 30 years in Russia. So that's after that analysis, and he declined to take it down. He was imprisoned in Russia, I think for over 30 years, and for sure then it was hard to follow up on that research from that perspective. So it was gone. But the paper is there, and it has now brought again back to our attention. So that's the trigger. So there I first said, okay, there was someone who analyzed maybe a correlation between solar activity and human, unrest, wars. And I mean, I don't make this correlation here, but it just came up into my mind. Hey, we have a period of solar maximum. We have even more sunspots, so more solar activity than expected out there. And we see, again, unrest, wars, revolutions kicking off everywhere and on our planet here. So at least I have reread all that material. But there's for sure more. So let me bring in the next paper, which is available. And this was during the year of 1970. So I think 50 years later, it has been also discovered in the Western world. And there is an article out there which is called Physical Factors of the Historical Process, which is kind of rewrite of his original findings of Chizhevsky. And this rewrite was published, or the translation, as you know, there was no English paper. So the professor Vladimir de Smet, so he just took the original theory, translated it into English, tried to keep it as original as possible. And this article was also published in an earlier version of the Cycles magazine by the Foundation. So this is a reprint of the Cycles magazine in the year of, let's check here, 1971. So now back 50 years ago, for a paper which was written 100 years ago. But I think this helps us now to understand what was the original research about in that paper. And by the way, you will find the links down below. And I would highly recommend, if you're interested in this idea and thinking, it's anyhow interesting to read that paper. It's a little bit mind-opening against that. I don't state here that this is the truth. It's just interesting from a perspective of doing cycle research. So this article now, for the first time, is a kind of summary we had on the work of Chizhevsky at that point in time. So it's interesting to read here, and therefore now he just summarized what he did. Let me just try to spot some important outcome here. Oh, let's directly jump to the conclusion. So this was the analysis 100 years ago, and in the upper chart here you see the sunspot activity at the bottom. So the dark black line is the sunspot activity. That's more or less the 11-year cycle or the solar cycle. And in the upper lane, you find what he built up his index of universal human military and political activity. So between 1750 and 1922. So at the point he did that analysis. And that's why he found the outcome that there's a high correlation between what he called the human military political activity and the correlation of sunspot activity out there. I mean, by this chart, it's clearly seen, but let's keep in mind this analysis was done over 100 years ago, more or less, on paper. And now summarized 1970 something. I think it's worth a read how this has come up. So by the original data. So this paper was not really taken serious. So that's maybe also the reason it was never picked up or not shown, or I don't know. But at least in Russia, you would have gone in prison for publishing this kind of work. At least here in our Western world, we are more open, at least to having that discussion. So interesting to see your comments, and maybe you will. I hope I don't trigger too much controversial discussion here. But yeah, that's the trigger here. So now we have 1970. We can reread that paper. So now let's fast forward into the year of 1996. Because 1996, there is another paper written by Professor Ertel. Here now we are coming here to Germany, the University of Göttingen, Germany. So where Professor Ertel tried to revisit the original findings from Chizhevsky, in a more scientific way, because it was always criticized for the more or less non-scientific way. But it's, I mean, these days, it's easy to criticize someone for doing it not in a scientific way 100 years ago. So, I mean, come on, we can't criticize someone 100 years ago for maybe not fulfilling our scientific standards we would apply today. It's a little bit interesting. But anyhow, he tried to bridge the gap. So Ertel took the analysis from Chizhevsky in the year of 1996. So this article and this work now has been performed by him 1996 in a scientific magazine. So this is also published in a scientific magazine. I will also include the download link for this paper here. And if we now get to this paper, he's also summarizing where this started. But what Ertel now did, he made more scientific connection to all the historical events in the past. So a lot of research has been performed by Ertel to on the one hand, have the solar activity, but this is measured, that's out there, that's not the criticism about it, but he developed this second variable about what he called violence from below. So he differs violence from above or violence from below, but he built that variable and he linked this to scientific events. So by not trying to manually link some events, so he really outlined how he constructed this variable with violence from below, and he even referenced what he has put in his analysis, so the sources he used to build up this index. So he referenced all of this analysis to the official statistical publications which are out there. So I think over 20 even over let's see here, over 18 publications from around the globe, so from Germany to the US to Russia, where some researchers documented different important events in history. And he took all these official documentation of these events, and based on that he ranked these events, gave these events a score by referencing other sources. So it's not his own source. So he referenced all the other sources and then built his index violence from below. So what he did then is, and you can read how he did that in that article. So the data analysis he then performed, and 1996, he now used modern science correlation statistics to prove if there are a correlation between these variables. So if you are interested in the mathematics, then he applied. This is all published in his article. So I think the criticism about the work 100 years ago. So first, the sources which historical events have been used have not been documented in the original paper. So this has now been closed by Ertel in 1996. And second, the more scientific approach now to try if there is a mathematical correlation between these two variables has also from a scientific perspective improved. Remember, now we are in the year of 1996. So he did that, it's documented, and now let's get to his summary of that data before I will continue. So let me have, so where are we? Where are his findings? It's that chart. So here you see also the source. As said, you will find the link in the video description from Professor Ertel, published January 1996 with a link. So finally, results obtained from the data were compared with results from various controls. It turned out that the connection between solar activity and violence from below is positive. So the more solar activity, the more social violence. And the correlation is generally not lacked. In sum, history text references to violence from below events tend to coincide with the years of maximum solar activity. So now we have the original work, 1922, missing sources, not scientific proof, put in prison, work not continued. Then 1970 something picked up in the Western world, the article, which we also have in our Cycles magazine archive. And then 1996, Professor Erte revisiting that approach and making this more scientific underpinned. So, and I don't find any more than that. So these are the official links to that paper, how they evolved, and now we are here in 2023. Yeah, again, fast forward 30 years. Now we are sitting here and trying to make up our mind what's happening there in the Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Gaza, what's going on in the world. And now back to where we are. We are in solar cycle 25 at a solar maximum with a lot of sunspot activity, even more than expected. So, I mean, I don't know if there's something behind or not. I just want to bring this research, the findings, back to the table. I think it's worth discussing them. And therefore now, coming into cycle analysis, I mean, we have much more tools on the table than 30, 50, or 100 years ago. So whom, if not the foundation for the study of cycles, should revisit that approach, bring modern cycle analysis technologies to the table, and at least start the discussion about it. Therefore, let me just briefly discuss with you why we have even more evidence that there is a connection between solar activity and what happens here to our human beings, because we have at least more evidence that there is a connection. We cannot clearly say that the research is true, but the research on the impact of solar activity on our humans has been researched much more. So therefore, I want to spend some minutes to give you some background on that before coming then more cycle analysis. So what we're talking about at solar maximum is exactly this picture here. So we are just here on the Earth somewhere, as this little pixel here maybe where you see the mouse cursor. This is where we are today. On the left you see the sun at a high level of solar activity. You see Mars eruptions here, solar flares taking place. These eruptions cause solar storms, which are then hitting the atmosphere of our Earth here, and there we have the geomagnetic field, which acts as a shield, that these solar activities are not directly hitting us here on Earth. So the geomagnetic field shields us for the direct impact of these solar activities, which coming like solar storms, flying like solar winds, approaching the Earth. And then something happens in our atmosphere. Therefore, we have the geomagnetic atmosphere around. And this is what causes these geomagnetic storms. This is what we can visually see, the aurora. If we see these green flashing lights in the sky, this is exactly the outcome or the impact from solar activity at a high solar maximum, or at least it happens more and more at the times of the solar maximum. You see much more activity, much more geomagnetic disruptions taking place here on Earth. So, and the connection now towards us as human beings, I mean, we are biochemical machines, we as human bodies, we react to these activities. So in the upper right, we see very simplified the sun, where solar energy cycles, so these sunspots are then approached or sent towards the Earth. I mean, they are sent around the sun, but often these disruptions also point towards the Earth. And then these solar storm and these charged particles are fired into that direction of our planet Earth here. So then they reach the magnetosphere, which is protecting us here from the direct impact of these charged particles. So the magnetosphere, think about, they slow down, the articles which are coming down through the atmosphere. Then we have Schumann-Alvan frequencies in this atmosphere, and there is an ionosphere also around our planet, and this ionosphere has also charged particles, and the ionosphere now with charged particles reacts with the charged particles which are emitted from the sun. And exactly this is what you observe as the aurora from a visual perspective in the sky. But that's just the visual impact, So these charged particles, you can't feel them, you can't hear them, you cannot see them, besides the aurora, have some kind of, and this is not finally researched, impact to our human body. So the brain, the heart, and the biochemical processes which interact in our human body, because they could be influenced by electromagnetic charged particles and the influence of the ionosphere, which is around our body. So the ionosphere is always there. And the ionosphere gets changed by solar weather. So we know about the weather outside, there's the temperature, the sun is shining, some clouds, rain. This is the weather we see, we feel, we read the weather report. But there's also a space weather, and there's also a space weather report, which exactly monitors these conditions, and these conditions influence our life here on Earth. Also within for different other topics, but this very simplified chain of reactions, that at the times of the solar maximum, there is some chain of reaction which then reaches us here on Earth, and our body is somehow influenced by these charged particles which come through the ionosphere, which we are living in. So that's very simplified, but at least there is the connection. And now we have also some medical research out there, and this is now where it really comes interesting. There's a lot of analysis on how solar storms influence us as human bodies here on the Earth. As I said, now we are not talking about 1970 or 1990. We are now talking about the year of 2000 and beyond, so there's much more data available. And this is just a quick summary about what happens at geomagnetic variations. And this is a research paper which deals with how these geomagnetic disruption, which are connected to solar maximum and geomagnetic storms. You can directly also see that you have a high increase in hospital admissions with depression, and manic depressive illness correlated to active geomagnetic days. So a lot more people come with this diagnosis on days with high geomagnetic activity. What's even also important, that pilots, and this is analyzed in the military as also in the public airline industry, experience high level of anxiety and decreased functional activity of their nervous system, including or resulting in a sharp decline of flying skills during active geomagnetic days. So, and this is no secret anymore, that military actions are planned on days which low geomagnetic activity, because you don't want to have your pilots being in a condition in these extreme situations. So, that's why there is space weather, so you can get a kind of estimate what could impact you tomorrow or during the next days, because you can also predict geomagnetic activity. And so forth. Also the number of accidents in Russian atomic stations is a high correlation between defects and impacts there, and high activity of geomagnetic storms. The research goes even on. This is just one study I'm citing here. So I think what Chizhevsky told us over 100 years ago, with maybe not fulfilling scientific standards these days, I think there's a lot more available these days, which confirms at least the connection. Yeah, maybe the bold statement he made that the wars and human upheaval is correlated to that cycle is a very bold statement. But at least the general idea he had, there is a connection, as now also research. There's medical research, there's research in psychological magazines. So if you combine these different researches here, I think it gets interesting here. And last but not least, then this brings me to the topic where cycle analysis now can really help us, because all this data is available for us. So there's the measure. So for example, what you're seeing here is the planetary geomagnetic impact for today, the forecast for the next 3 hours. So we have the data at hand. It's measured on different stations, the impact, and predicted. So this is the NASA Planetary Space Weather Prediction Center. This is public available information, and they predict this information up to 30 days in advance. So they predict the expected geomagnetic disturbances, which would impact here us on Earth for the next 30 days. So, whoa, what great. We have a data set, first with a lot of historical data. So all the historical data is available for the planetary index, can be downloaded, public available. It's there for today, and we have forecasts for the next 30 days. So for the point of data analytics, I mean, what a perfect gift that is now to correlate that data with different other topics here. So and the data for this index is just quickly summarized in different categories. So there are also geomagnetic storms outside, and they are categorized from no bis minor and moderate. And you can see that even this morning we had a minor geomagnetic disruption happening. And at these times, so solar maximum, these disruptions coming more and more to the surface. And if you now understand that this has an impact on our humans here for medical conditions, so much more accidents happen, pilots get influenced during their ability to control, to take risks, to make decisions quickly. Depression kicks in more highly than at other points in time. So if we now would to try to translate it to the global stock market or to the business cycle, this is also influencing how we treat risks, how we think about the future, how optimistic or pessimistic we are for our future. This will impact also our decision-making procedure. This will impact us in how we take financial risks. If we are more open for risk-taking, or if we are not so open for risk-taking. Similar to, I mean, this bold statement, if we just accept being depressed from the powers above, yeah, or there are times when we feel completely different, we take the risk, we go out there, we don't accept anymore the powers from above, so the power from below comes to the surface and then expresses this different view at these cyclic energy states, what we currently see in different revolutions, wars outside there. So as said, this will trigger a lot of controversial discussions, but I think the research is important. We need to bring this research also to the next level. As said, 100 years ago, then brought to the West, 1970, with a summary in English, so we can read about it. 1996, with more scientific background and methods. And they all confirm. So there's more and more confirmation coming to the table. There's not more and more contra arguments coming. There's more and more supporting arguments now showing up. For sure, the research does not allow us at this given point in time to make really a conclusion. But I think the connection between geomagnetic activity and the impact on our social human behavior here on Earth is somehow there, from bold to smaller now research analysis, and all related to the activity of the sun. So I mean, nobody would decline that our living here on this planet is more or less dominated by the activity of the sun in different kinds of energies, which will then impact us here. So, and this is all cyclic. This is all cyclic. There is a solar cycle out there. So, what about cycles here? I mean, that's just the special edition for today. I wanted to give you the references here in the section. There's no clear conclusion we can draw from it today, but I think at these points in time, with the solar cycle 25 reaching its maximum, geomagnetic activity even higher than expected, the analysis, which started 100 years ago, connecting this to a lot of civil or human unrest, which is also happening now currently again in the world, at least told me it's time to revisit that analysis. It's really time to revisit this. And as we have more data now about the KP index, the AP index, the prediction of this data, let's turn on our digital signal processing. Let's do what Chizhevsky was not able to do 100 years ago. Let's do what Airtel was not able to do 50 years ago, but we are today. So, okay, too much for today, but maybe it inspires you reading the paper, thinking about solar cycle and geomagnetic activity. And at some point in time, we will also discuss the impact to the business cycle and maybe to the stock markets. I know there are papers out there. Even the Federal Reserve in New York has some years ago published some relations between the solar cycle and that. It's all everything's not final there, but let's get it. Let's pick it up again. Let's take it serious. Let's discuss the pros and cons. That's it for today. So I failed to bring this knowledge to you today. It should not be forgotten. Anyhow, fascinating what people have been able to bring up 100 years ago. And we need to continue this analysis. Thank you for listening today. Seeing you soon. Looking forward to your comments. And let's see what we have triggered here. Thank you for today. Bye.